Hello, welcome to El Seminario. Today we're very excited to have Ambar Carballo. She's a Chilean plant breeding and plant genetics PhD student at UW-Madison. She has international experience in vegetable and ornamental production and is now focusing on breeding vegetables for organic systems. She's an advocate for participatory agricultural research while collaborating with private breeders, farmers, and chefs to carry out a variety of trials. Thank you very much, Ambar, for agreeing to participate in El Seminario.
Thank you, Claudia, for that introduction. Yes, I'm very excited here to share a little bit about my research and also talk about Chile at the end. When I was thinking about what you put at the end, I got excited because there's so many good things to say about my country. But yeah, I'll just get it started. As Claudia said, my name is Ambar Carballo, and right now I'm doing my PhD at UW-Madison in plant breeding and plant genetics. And I'm specifically working with organic tomato breeding, focusing on flavor, yields, and disease resistance, among other traits. So a brief agenda is I'll start with a short biography of myself and then tell you what we do at our lab, set the scene a little bit about organic tomatoes and tomato breeding, what is tomato breeding, which is what I do. I was going to share some trial results, but then I realized I wasn't going to have time. So I'll just leave that for follow-up questions if anyone has any, and then I'll talk about Chile. So I'm from Chile, South America. I did my bachelor's in agronomy and horticulture over there. I was always very interested in getting different perspectives of agriculture and different ways of doing agriculture. So I've had multiple opportunities to go abroad. I went to Holland and learned about lilies breeding and ornamental breeding in general. That was my first connection with plant breeding and what got me excited into getting into that. I also worked in Mexico for a bit doing strawberry and tomato production. The photo at the bottom is just hundreds and hundreds of hectares of strawberries production, which are then exported from Mexico to the US. I wouldn't say that's the most sustainable way of doing it, but it's part of the reality of farming. And at the top left is tomato production, also in Mexico and also for exportation to the US. And I also had some experience in California in 2018, right before coming to Wisconsin, in ornamental propagation industry. And so after all of those different experiences, I kind of settled on what I liked and what I didn't like and what I was passionate about, which is organic farming, sustainable practices, participatory breeding. And so right now I'm doing organic tomato breeding research. And that started in 2019 when I started with my master's in agroecology and now continuing with a PhD in plant breeding. I wanted to share the website of our lab because it has a lot of information about the research that we do and the extension. The program is called Urban and Regional Food Systems, which is part of the Dawson Lab or created by the Dawson Lab. Julie Dawson is my PI, my advisor. And so we do a lot of work in research, but also with extension. We work closely with farmers, also other stakeholders in the food system, like chefs, other breeders, and also the consumers, people that eat veggies. So we do different projects. We have some participatory trials where we have people try some like vegetable varieties in their own gardens or farms and give us feedback. And so we can gather that data and then publish hopefully some significant information that people then can use and decide which varieties to use, for example. We've done some comparison of different managements in tomato production, for example, in tunnels, which is that little photo on the left in the screenshot of the website, or open field. We also do tomato breeding, which is, we have a big tomato breeding program where we have multiple projects going on. So I'm in charge of a couple of those. But besides tomato, we also work with potato, carrots, hazelnuts, barley, and other crops. So if anyone's interested, they can go to the website, or you can also ask me questions at the end. Yes. So I wanted to frame what is plant breeding, and I just wrote a definition out of my own words, trying to make it very accessible for people with different backgrounds. Plants have traits, they have characteristics, and plant breeding is focused on changing those traits to benefit humans in some sort of way. So that trait or characteristic could be yields, how much the plant produces in terms of fruit, for example, or the quality of that product, if they are resistant or not resistant to some specific disease, like a fungi, a bacteria. All of these traits people have been working on in many crops, trying to improve them, trying to make the food systems produce more, or different things that can benefit the food system itself. And I have this little diagram here that I found interesting, because when we talk about plant breeding, we think about plants, and that's like the first word that's just associated with that. But there are many areas involved in plant breeding. We have the genetics and biotechnology aspect of it. We have statistics. Every time that we do a trial, that we have a project, then we have data that we collected. And to analyze that data, we need to run some statistics to it. We have to create some model to analyze all that data. And so statistics is like very confounded with plant breeding. Of course, we have agronomy, horticulture, and how we can, for example, be flexible in different management systems, depending on the plant structure, for example. We have plant pathology, bioinformatics, etc. So just wanted to frame that there are multiple areas that go into plant breeding that have to be taken into consideration. And I wanted to also show this little graph on the left. It's a very simplified way of showing one idea of what you could improve. For example, on the left, we have a red tomato with very short shelf life. The shelf life is the amount of time that the fruit is going to be in the supermarket, for example, just sitting there until the consumer takes it home, and then the time that it waits at home to be consumed. So we want a fruit that is going to last enough, that is not going to rot in the supermarket. And so sometimes we have a variety that's very tasty, that has good resistance to pathogens, but it doesn't last long. So what can we do there? We can go to another variety, for example, the one on the right. This is just made up information, but that's an example that has long shelf life, but it doesn't have all those other great qualities. So we can cross them, do traditional crossing, and obtain, after selection and evaluation in the fields, we could potentially obtain a red tomato with long shelf life, which is the tomato at the bottom. So that's to give you an idea of what one objective, for example, that we could have with plant breeding for tomato. And so in tomato breeding, there's many traits of interest. Tomatoes have been domesticated for a long time, and they've been continued to be worked and selected throughout the years. And so, as many other crops, yields, it's always a trait of interest, always trying to increase the yields. Fruit size and fruit set, which is the amount of fruit that a plant produces and how it matures. Disease resistance is also a big one that's just from the beginning, and currently there are always new pathogens. So that's something that is always in development. But there have been other traits of interest that have been added the last few years, which is, for example, fruit quality. Some people are working on increasing the concentration of antioxidants that the fruit can have and can provide to the consumer. The fruit flavor and disease resistance just stays constant, because there's always, with the climate change, there's always a lot of movement of the pathogens, new races, etc. And just to briefly talk about flavor, because it's something that we're working on. When we say we want to improve flavor, what do we mean by that? The perception of flavors affected by multiple components. They're listed here on the left: the taste, the smell, the texture, the appearance, and the mouthfeel are all components that affect the flavor that we perceive when we when we have that first bite of tomato. So how do we improve that? So then the fruit quality is also affected by the genetic component, which the variety has specific genetic components that affect how many sugars are produced and the volatiles that are produced, etc. The management practices, like the amount of the type of watering that's used, the fertilization, also affect the flavor. And then storage and shipping also affect the final flavor when we eat it. So there's been people that have been working on finding those specific volatiles that can make flavor better, but there's just a lot of components and biochemical processes there embedded in that. So it's very complex. So I just wanted to move now into our project objective. I'm working with multiple tomato projects, but this is the first one that I started with, so that's why I wanted to highlight it. So we are trying to breed tomato varieties that excel in organic systems that have improved yields and flavor. And for that, we want to have an adaptation to the local organic farmers. We work mainly with, or mostly with, farmers in Wisconsin. And we want to improve the traits that the farmers are looking to be improved, which is improving the yields, improving disease resistance, and having good flavor. To carry out this project, we used a participatory breeding approach, which is we work closely as researchers. We work closely with the farmers, the consumers, the chefs, which are also the consumers, and other breeders and researchers in the area. This way, participatory breeding itself can be a whole other presentation, but just want to give a few highlights of why it's so beneficial for the kind of work that we're doing. It helps decentralize the environment. So we have trials not only at the research station, but also we send seed to farmers and also gardeners to try them out. And we have more info data. We decentralize the stakeholders, not only as the people working at the university making these decisions, and I'll talk about this a little bit later. And also we get local adaptation. We're not trying to breed a tomato that you can grow anywhere in the world and it's gonna produce perfectly anywhere in the world. We want it to be locally adapted for the needs of the farmers. The farmers here don't have the same needs as a farmer in California, for example. So we're focusing on the local needs and the local conditions. So I just wanted to show briefly how a crossing scheme can look for a traditional breeding program, and just don't get overwhelmed by all the arrows here. I'm gonna put the pointer. Okay, I'm assuming you can see my pointer. So we have lines that we use here at the top as parental lines. So we make crosses between them. We make multiple crosses, and I'm just gonna focus on a few. We have Crimson Sprinter, which is a commercial variety, and Defiant, which is another commercial variety. We cross them, and then we do selection. We obtain that first, this is the first generation. We take the seed, we take it to the field, we grow out multiple plants, and then from that we start selecting, and then saving the seed, and then continuing that selection and grow out until we hopefully land into something that's improved. So we made that between all of these varieties. And so we had multiple different lines, multiple families to then trial out in the high tunnel and the open field. And just to show you a little more specifically of what this could look like. This is, for example, the first generation, and the circles just show different plants with different, they're all different because they come from different grasses. And so we do a field evaluation. We take the seed, for example, from 2 plants that we think are the best. And then we do the same. We grow them out and then take the seed from 1 plant and then continue that process until we obtain something that's a little bit more uniform. And then we started sending seed to the farmers. So they also do on-farm selection. So we're doing that at the same time as growing the plants in the research station, and that gives us an idea of how selecting in different environments can result in different varieties or the specific differences between the fruit. So that's where we are. And now next year we want to have wider trials. We started with more than 20 breeding lines, and now we're coming down to maybe 3 that we want to send to the farmers, and now we can send them more seed, and so we can have a better evaluation of the uniformity and how well these varieties perform in their systems. And I thought it would be interesting for you to see what does it entail to make a tomato cross. So here what we're doing is, these are tomato plants, and this is a tomato flower. The tomato flower is a perfect flower, which means that it has both the female and male organs in the same flower. So what we're doing here is we're taking out the sepals, the petals right now, and this flower, this plant is gonna act like as the female. So we're taking the male organ, which is what we're seeing now, and these are the pollen producer anthers. So because those are not mature yet, they haven't released the pollen. And now we have the stigma, which is the female part of the flower, ready and receptive to receive the pollen from a different plant. So then we go to another plant here on the left that we want to use as a male. So we obtain the pollen by buzzing the flower, which stimulates the buzzing of a bee. And then if you go to the right picture, we have the spoon with the pollen, which are those yellow dots. And then here in this red circle, we have the flower that we emasculated previously. So we dip it with the pollen, and that's hopefully gonna produce fecundation, and then we're gonna get a fruit. So here, labeling is super important. We have to have the name of the plants that we used as female and then as male. And then we just need to make sure, the plants are growing, we have a fruit, and then once their fruit is ripe, we can harvest it. And now the seed that we obtain from that tomato is the seed that has genetic material from both of the parents. So we can then plant that in the next year and do a screening in the field and do some selection. As I mentioned, we are working with improving flavor, and that working on improving flavor can involve different processes. We do like lab work where we do Brix analysis, which is the sugar content of the fruit, the acidity of the fruit, but also, of course, we need to have some more qualitative analysis where we, as people, taste the fruit. So we have tastings throughout the summer with the crew in our research station, but we also work closely with chefs because they have a more developed tasting buds. They have all the vocabulary to kind of like more specifically describe the flavors that are coming out in specific from a specific variety. And they can also give us tips on how well would a variety work as a salad tomato, or maybe as a soup or salsa tomato. So we get that kind of feedback, and it's just a really interesting way to incorporate this kind of side of the process into the research. And it's definitely valuable data that we obtained from here. So we did this last year in Pasture and Plenty. They helped us host it. So I think I went by a little bit quick, but I wanted to briefly touch space about, or just share some things about Chile. It's a country of nature, marvels. That's what I wanted to focus on. Here's the flag and the coat of arms. And I wanted to share that many people know Chile. It's a long country in South America, but that is interesting not only because it's long and skinny, it's also interesting because we have so many different climates as you go from north to south. We have the desert area, then semi-arid area. We have Mediterranean weather, some oceanic weather and temperate rains. So that means that we have many different ecosystems. But now I'm going to show you a few of them. We have the Atacama Desert, which is the driest desert in the world, not the largest, but the driest. And I know that these pictures don't really show that because you would expect something completely just empty, but you can find that in the north of the Atacama Desert. But as you go south, you still have mammals like guanacos and some birds that are from the area. But also something interesting that I wanted to show you is that we get every 5 or 6 years, depending on the weather conditions, we get the flowered desert, which is the picture in the middle, where there are some plant species that the bulbs remain in the soil, but need a certain amount of water, of rain to happen before they can sprout. And because it doesn't rain too often, it's not something that happens every year. So, and then when it happens, all of the species flower at the same time. So you're walking in the desert area and then you just see it flooded with flowers of different colors. So these are all pictures that I took. It was just very exciting to see all of this happen. And I think it's happening this year too. I think this was like 5 years ago. We also have El Matorral Esclerófilo, which is a Mediterranean, I misspelled it, but Mediterranean weather, very similar to Central California. We have plants adapted to really dry summers and then rainy winters, although not so rainy now because of the drought, but they're specifically adapted to that. I'm from this area. This is like central Chile, and I just love this area. It's just really close to my heart because I grew up in this kind of environment. It's really pretty. Then we also have Selva Valdiviana, which could be like a Valdivian rainforest, which is a rainy forest kind of weather. It's interesting because it's not so south of Chile. It's a little bit south of where the Mediterranean weather ends. And then this is a remnant of the southern climate. So it's very interesting because you're really in a jungle there, and then you go out and then the conditions are very different. So very pretty. Patagonia, I haven't been to Patagonia, so this is a photo that I took from the internet, but friends that have been there and post photos, this is just literally how it looks. It's just wonderful. We have the glaciers, the mountains, this wonderful lake, so many places. And so where to go? I feel like all regions have something special. I am very fond of the southern area because of all of the vegetation that exists there. On the left, I'm at the Huilo Huilo Reserve, which is kind of similar to the Valdivian forest or rainy forest. And then on the right, I'm on another park, Hornopiren Park, which you need to hike like 4 hours uphill. And then you get to this beautiful lake surrounded by mountains. And then there's a volcano on the side. So yeah, many places you can visit. It depends on what kind of weather you like. Yeah, that was my presentation. Thank you to Seminario for letting me share my work and open for questions.